All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Cassandra Koblenz and I am the Senior Curator and Director of Public Engagement at the Orange County Museum of Art. And I am so excited to have this panel discussion with all these wonderful artists and our guest curator this evening. It has been a long road. We were meant to open these exhibitions in April. And of course, with the pandemic, everything was delayed, and it's been quite an extremely, I don't know, lots of lessons and lots of challenges that we all faced in realizing these projects, but I'm so grateful to all of them. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about the exhibitions and what we're up to at ACMA and the context, and then I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists to you all tonight. And then I will be posing questions to them as a panel, and I'll respond to them. There, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A tab, and you're welcome to type questions into that at any point throughout the conversation. When we're done talking amongst us, I will read some of those questions, and hopefully we'll get to all of them. We'll see how many we get. So just to kind of give you a little background, the Orange County Museum of Art for the past couple of years has been in a temporary location that we've called ACMA Expand. And during our time there, we have been focusing on, we've had this focus on the California and the Pacific Rim. And we've taken our interim time in this temporary location as we're moving to a new building and going to be launching a whole new program with the new building and the new museum. But on this time, it's been sort of a moment for us to reflect on our mission and our program and this idea of focusing on artists from California and the Pacific Rim. And so when I conceived of how we would approach that, I wanted it to be an opportunity to really think through the complexity of the kind of cultural landscape of California and Los Angeles, and then our larger international scope as well, and that sort of looking out towards the Pacific and across, both to the east and then to the north and south. And so many of the artists that we've been working with are from countries all around the Pacific Rim, and the artists that you'll hear from today have relationships to many countries also in those areas of the world. And I think what's been so fascinating to me is that all of those relationships and that cultural complexity is really rich in our Southern California communities. And I think that's been really wonderful over the course of these projects and these years for me to really come to terms with the sort of complexity of our own cultural landscape. And we're constantly learning more and more about it. And I hope that's what we can accomplish this afternoon or this evening. This season was meant to mostly focus on issues of identity and immigration, and also some of the artists dealing with ideas about language and writing and storytelling. So some of those themes you'll see play out in the exhibitions. I will say the museum is now open to the public, and I encourage all of you, if you haven't done so already, to visit the museum and see the works in person, because of course we're doing all of this on Zoom, but whatever experiences we can get in person, and if you can find a way to see the works in person, they are just, stronger, richer, more dynamic, and than just over your computer screen. Anyhow, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our artists, starting with Marsia Alexander-Clarke. Working with video as her primary medium, Marsia Alexander-Clarke creates unfamiliar geometrical forms that are new to the visual vocabulary through the gestures of cropping, marking, and editing. Her video work stems from a lineage of painting, including works of post-impressionism, cubism, and abstract expressionism. Alexander-Clarke came to the United States from Chile and gained fine art training in Missouri, New York, and California. She had solo exhibitions at the California Museum of Photography, University of California, Riverside, the Robert V. Fullerton Art Museum, and the Rio Hondo College Art Gallery. among others. In 2001, she received an individual artist grant from the City of Pasadena Cultural Affairs Division for her choral video installation 6-in-1 to 64 choir, which was exhibited at the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena. In 2018, she became a fellow in film and video with the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. She lives and works in Altadena, California. Carolyn Castaño was born and raised in Los Angeles to Colombian parents. Carolyn works across various mediums in reference to her family background and the syncretic cultural scene of Los Angeles. She had solo exhibitions at La Band Gallery at Loyola Marymount University, Container Gallery in Los Angeles, Lombard Fried Fine Art, New York. Her work has been featured in the group exhibitions We Must Risk Delight, 20 artists from Los Angeles, at the Magazzino del Sale in Venice, and a collateral exhibition of the 56th International Venice Biennale. She was also included in Football, the Beautiful Game at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and the acclaimed traveling exhibition Phantom Sightings, Art After the Chicano Movement at the El Barrio Museum in New York and the Museo Tamayo Arte Contemporáneo in Mexico City, and other locations. She is the recipient of the Joan Mitchell Foundation Grant for Painters and Sculptors, the California Community Foundation Getty Fellow, and the Collage City of Los Angeles Individual Artist Grant. Carolyn Castaño received her BFA at the San Francisco Art Institute and an MFA at the University of California, Los Angeles. She lives and works in Los Angeles. Maryrose Cobarrubias Mendoza. Maryrose uses memory, material, significance, and personal narratives. Her work expresses circumstances of cultural amnesia and post-assimilation through processes of the handmade. She's had solo exhibitions at COOP in Seoul, Korea, Hudson Jones Gallery, Commonwealth and Council in Los Angeles, and her work has also been included in historically notable exhibitions, including Gathering Place, Art Making of Asian Pacific Women Artists at the USC Pacific Asia Museum in Pasadena, California, and the traveling exhibitions Memories of Overdevelopment, Philippine Diaspora in Contemporary Art at the Pluglin Gallery in Winnipeg, Canada, that traveled to University of North Dakota and others. Mendoza is a recipient of a 2019 Guggenheim Fellowship, a COLA Individual Artist Fellowship, and a New York Art Matters Fellowship. She graduated from the Claremont Graduate University with an MFA degree, and she is currently an associate professor in Drawing and Visual Arts and Media Studies Division at Pasadena City College. She lives and works in Pasadena. Next, we have Kunmishin Shin. Kyungmi creates sculptures and installations to investigate the intersection of her family heritage from South Korea and the effect of globalization. Shin's work have been exhibited at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, the Seonjae Art Museum in Seoul, Korea, the Japanese National Museum in Los Angeles, Torrance Art Museum in Torrance, California. She's received numerous grants, including the California Community Foundation Grant, the Durfee Grant, the Pasadena City Individual Artist Fellowship, and the LA Cultural Affairs Artist in Residence Grant. She has completed over 20 public artworks, and her most recent public video sculpture was installed at the Netflix headquarters in Hollywood, California in 2017. She received an MFA degree from the University of California at Berkeley. She lives and works in Los Angeles. Also joining us this evening is Ricardo J Reyes. As part of our program at ACMA Expand, we've been working consistently with guest curators, and for this particular season, I invited Ricardo, who you'll have to forgive me, I often refer to as Rico, so if I call him that in the course of our conversation, slightly less formal. So it was Rico's suggestion to and proposal to work with Maryrose for this season. So he is the guest curator, or the curator of that exhibition. And so he'll be joining us in conversation, I think, in general, but also with particular expertise, we might say, in Maryrose's project. So Ricardo J Reyes is the Edith Dale Monson Gallery Curator and Director at the Hartford Art School and Galleries at the University of Hartford. He oversees the activities of the Joseph and Sylphie Galleries, the Cayman Print Study Center, and the Art on Campus program. Rico received his BA in sculpture from UC Berkeley, studying with Richard Shaw and Brian Wall. His MFA in New Genres from UCLA, studying with Paul McCarthy and Chris Burden, and his PhD in Cultural Studies from Goldsmith University of London, studying with Simon Sheikh. His research addresses curating contemporary art from diasporic Filipino communities, mega exhibitions and art fairs, photography and cultural regeneration. His published work include Filipinos in Stockton, Confrontations, Crossings, and Convergence, Photographs of the Philippines in the United States, and an essay titled Baryonyx Noise, included in Beyond Borders in the anthology of 2012. Rico has curated exhibitions at the UCLA Fowler Museum, the SF MoMA Artist Gallery, University of the Pacific at University of San Francisco, the Queer Cultural Center, Asian Pacific Island Center, Soma Art Center, and San Francisco Gay Asian Pacific Alliance. As a visual artist, Rico shows video installations and performances. Recently, he has shown at Hartford Art Space, Boston Center for the Arts, a Center for Contemporary Art in, Alira, a Center for Contemporary Arts in Newark, and SF MoMA Artist Gallery, A's Hotel Gallery in New York, Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Cultural Center of the Philippines in Manila. So that is our esteemed panel. Lots of incredible and diverse experience in this group. And we're really looking forward to hearing all of your insights and about your exhibition. So I think we might as well start there. I think what I'll ask for each of you to do is take a few minutes to, we're gonna shift to our PowerPoint presentation, and for each of you to introduce your project and tell us a little bit about your practice in general. So I think we're gonna get started with Marsia.
Hi everybody, my name is Marsia Alexander-Clarke, and my project on view at OQA is called Ojos Profundos, Profound Eyes. This is a phrase I have adopted from one of Pablo Neruda's early poems. In my mind, this phrase refers to looking and seeing deeply beneath the surface. Most of my video work is based on narrow slivers of recorded footage from nature, which I call marks, in reference to the marks made in drawing and painting. There are 3 video compositions in my exhibit, each built with video marks. Sonidos is a 5-channel program. This work is system-based in that each screen begins with a single mark, which gradually builds into clusters. And this is the first cluster from that previous mark. And then there's the next cluster, that one. So they build up and become almost something different in that buildup. And can we see the 5 screens? Yeah. Okay. They're the 5 screens together. So those are all built from a single mark, a different mark in each screen. The next piece that I have is I have 2 projections in another room. One of them is called Ojos Profundos, and it is a lyrical work based on the poetic language of several of the video marks. And as you can see, that central mark is, well, they're all marks. The red ones I have colored, but those are just little nuggets from nature. And we can go to the next one, please. Yeah. And then the next one. And in a lot of the videos, I work mostly abstractly, and a lot of them I reduce the first part so that they become something else. And they're kind of lyrical narratives. The other piece that I have is called Horas de la Noche. It is reconstructed, here it is. It is a reconstructed choral piece based on some phrases from the early poems of Pablo Neruda. I commissioned Anna Ancheta, who is the leader of the choir that I have been working with for quite a few years. I commissioned her to compose several short songs from the phrases from Pablo Neruda. This work is influenced by minimalism and the multi-voice text readings prevalent in the 70s and 80s, such as a performance of 18 people speaking all at once, the words of Thoreau's Walden, presented by John Cage. So this is also a piece that is informed by minimalism in music. As an introduction to the following artists, I want to say that I am much older than anybody on this panel, about 40 years older. And in my 20s, I went to New York City. That was the center of the art world, and took in the wonderful work that was happening at that time. A lot of exploration, and that's the beginning. I saw the beginnings of conceptual art and pop art, and also of minimalism. And those works in that period has informed my work. So it was a time, it was a boys' club at that time, and it was a time where artwork was, to say it in a simple way, it was mostly art about art. Of course, there was a lot of philosophical thinking at that time also. But the notion of self, which the other artists are working so much with, the notion of self was not acceptable at that time. Indeed, it was supposed to, no one was supposed to talk of one's life in relationship to one's artwork. And I have not done so all these years until just very recently upon the pressure from my friends to open up and talk about my own experiences with my artwork. And so I call my marks kind of like little pinholes, looking at the outer world from a little peephole, so to speak. I tend to be very introverted and not very social. And so I think I have come to realize that those little marks are not only marks influenced by Agnes Martin and Sol LeWitt, which I care about very much, but also from my own way of experiencing the world. So I'm totally amazed at younger artists and how they flourish. They have so many wonderful opportunities to expand their work, and they just go for it. And I'm so amazed at them. But my artwork is coming from a different place, and I just wanted to put that forward before we go on to the next person. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much, Marcia. I think what you'll find as each of these artists introduce their practices, they're each very distinct artists, well, obviously, but with very distinct perspectives on some of these issues. And I think that's what is so fascinating to me as this conversation will progress. I think we'll start to see some of the subtleties and the ways that there are conversations amongst their work. But formally and the way that they work is quite different. So who's up next in our PowerPoint? Is it Maryrose or Carolyn?
I think Carolyn.
Oh, there's the rest. Yeah, oh, it's Carolyn. Go for it.
Okay. Well, Maryrose. So hi, everybody. My name is Carolyn Castaño. Thank you, Cassandra and Akma, for inviting me to make a project for this season. It's very exciting for me. So I am a little bit about my practice. I am a painter, drawer, artist. Where I guess my practice is rooted in painting and drawing, but I also work in video and installation work and photography from time to time. And so for the show at ACMA, my project is called Cali es Cali, and it uses my father's archive of photographic material, video, and Super 8 films as a jumping off point to talk about immigration, about identity, family identity, memory, and home. The expression, or the Cali es Cali, or Cali is Cali, comes from a popular Colombian expression from my parents' hometown of Cali, which is basically like our expression, no, there's no place like home. But in my kind of thinking, I think of Cali, and also LL Cool J's going back to Cali, right, California. And so the photographs and my father's archive span from the late 1950s until 2011 or 2013, I forget, when he passed away. And they span from his life and my parents' life in Colombia, in Cali, to their life in Los Angeles, and then back and forth several times because they, couldn't decide whether they wanted to stay here or not. We can, I don't know if you want to go. So this first section is La Casa, or home, and it's in the background there are different photos of homes that we've lived in both places. And in the center is a photograph that I took of MacArthur Park in Los Angeles, which has been kind of the map point or the center of our family life in Los Angeles. I mean, not the only part, but in many ways the central part, where the area that my parents came to, and that kind of expanded from there into other parts of LA, and where my mom still lives today at. And so there's photographs of my grandparents' home in Colombia, and other homes that we lived in when we were there, and then places that we lived in here in LA. The front, the two sculptural pieces are these tile pedestals that are covered with this mosaic pattern that comes from my grandmother's house in Italy. And the photographs of her house are in black and white, and so I had to interview different members of the family and WhatsApp them and ask them what color were the tiles, and someone said black, blue and white, someone else said brown and pink. And my uncle said, well, that's the tiles I shaved for the very first time in that space. And it's kind of a very traditional Latin American patio that's usually tiled with a slop sink. It's where you wash the mops or wash clothes. So a lot of that area would be tiled. Can I control this? No, okay. Can we go to the next one? So in this scene, we have on the left my grandmother's Ruana, or poncho serape, but Ruana is more of a, I think they call them in South America. And then a piece that's called, is that the title? But like Collage Wall. And so, but the Ruana is an article of clothing that traveled with my aunt, that you could see kind of in the background there, coming off the airline coming to Los Angeles, that my dad took back when you could greet your loved ones on the tarmac. And the Ruana was passed down kind of from family member to family member, and then somehow it ended up in my possession probably like 25 years ago or so. And so my aunt is carrying it in the photograph, and right behind her, she's, I think, is on a Mexicana Airlines flight. And so right behind her, it says Mexican, where you could just see the Mexican on there. And I've always thought that that's just really interesting and just very poignant for this time period that we're living in when we think about immigration and Latino immigration to this country. So you can, I'll just leave that there and you can think about it. So in the, we can go to the next one. It's stuck. There it is. So here's a larger view of the collage wall. So in this, in the collage wall, I had, oh, there we go. Several of the photographs in the show are enlarged from original photographs, but in the collage wall, I used a lot of the original photographs of the family, family friends, cousins from Colombia that I barely know, airline tickets, kind of ephemera like suitcase tags and driver's licenses. And I juxtaposed them with drawings of the landscape. So that's my dad in New York, I think on the New Jersey side of New York. And then I placed him on top of a drawing of the landscape. And so in my work, I've been drawing the landscape and working from botanical illustration, scientific drawings of maps and drawings of mountains and rivers from Colombia and South America in general, and thinking about its role in the environment, but also in conflict. And so with this project, I started thinking about the landscape and its role in immigration and in the imaginary of the immigrant. And so in the photographs, I really see as the poser, the person posing is projecting towards a future or kind of owning his new scape or landscape. The landscape from the past is also embedded in that as a kind of like memory. I also have included in the collage wall drawings of migratory birds that travel back and forth from the north sphere to the south. This is the, I have to look at the Reinita Amarilla, the yellow warbler. Plants and flowers from the Americas. Could go to the next one. That arrow is just, there we go. We just kind of click through. In a lot of the drawings, I've overlaid them with motifs that come from Colombia's, there we go, you could stop there for a second, pre-conquest indigenous cultures, the Muisca and the Chibcha, whose gold works, right, are in the Gold Museum in Bogota and are also kind of national symbols of Colombian identity. And they're also tied to the landscape, right, and to many of these places where grew up going to. A lot of the drawings have this overlay of gold leaf on them from these shapes that are taken from symbols found in pottery, gold artifacts, petroglyphs. A lot of the family, the ephemera are like old postcards. This is my dad's like Social Security card, little folder that you would get. The bottom right there is a business card of his business Kalima Graphics, which was his print shop / photography studio in MacArthur Park that serviced members of that community, which is predominantly Central American and Mexican American. There's a whole other part of the archive. Is only a small selection. There's much more that are actually photographs of people that would come to his shop, and then other events and stuff. Go on to the next ones. In this one on the back wall it's called personajes or personalities, and they're enlarged ID or passport photos that my dad collected. In the back are photographs of my dad at different times in his life, my mom on the lower left, my mother's parents in the bottom row, my dad's sister and brother in the top row, and my brother, who's older than me, in different, as a baby, and then the bottom two are like, he's like 9 and then maybe 13, and then I'm in the bottom right. And with these, I just kind of think about the kind of subjectivity, right, of the photographs and what they're putting forth, and each. So I think they're of them as their official document photographs, but taken right at maybe at a time when people were more formal about their projection, right, and in a official photograph, and so they're very serious. Uh-oh, who's that? Okay. Then sorry, real life peeking in. Now you could meet some of my family, and then in the foreground is a tabletop vitrine of objects from my family, a collection of passports, my dad's passports, and they're all Colombian, and the last one is US. There's the yellowish paper is an immunization record that my dad had to present in order to get a visa to come to the United States. A carriel, which is the satchel there, the bag, which is a kind of side satchel or satchel used by cowboys in Colombia, or like kind of in the country, but it's also this object that is imbued with like national identity, or people might have one in the closet. The cacerola is a small kind of egg frying little pan that I stole from my mother's kitchen, and my dad's like fancy shoes, and the Thomas Brothers guide that my father, we always had a Thomas Brothers guide in the house, and there were several when he passed away, and I somehow this is the one that was kept, and it's from 1971, the year I was born, which I thought was really poignant. His glasses and a pair of.
Mommy, I want my green iPod.
Okay, hold. It's down. Daddy knows where it is. Okay, so there's a child. We can go to the next one. But in the vitrine, I've sort of was thinking of creating this museological display, right, of our family items, or the title of this piece is very long. I can hardly remember it, but it's basically objects that we have that have traveled back and forth from one place to another, so that we may kind of remember. And so a lot of those objects traveled from Colombia to the US, and then back from the US to Colombia. And my father had these big like chests that he bought and that he packed with everything. and then they went back and forth in shipping containers. And so anyway, in this slide are these, what we call the bubble chairs or burbujas. And what those are, they're like knockoffs of modernist furniture, specifically the Aero Arneal Pastille chair, bubble chair, fiberglass chair. And these were, well, one of them was brought to our house from Colombia. And in Colombia, they were part of my father's like best friend's business, and they fabricated this kind of fiberglass furniture knockoffs. Sometime in the 80s, my dad brought one with him to our house in LA and had and he brought the mold back and actually made several more in our garage in LA. Hello. Removing the child. And so these traveled from our different homes, from MacArthur Park to when we moved to Glendale and then back again to MacArthur Park. And they clashed with, my mother's like English colonial furniture and then the 80s furniture. But with them, I think about the kind of creativity and kind of flexibility and interpretation of these like modernism in Latin America, and how people kind of maybe take it and own it in different ways or reinterpret it. In the background are two of my paintings from the past few years called Tropical Geometries, Ruana Interruption. And in them, I'm painting the landscape that you would see inspired by these kind of like botanical illustrations and paintings from the Romantic era of landscape painting. But in them, I've kind of interrupted the scape or the rectangular format of the traditional landscape with these geometric patterns that come from textiles from the Americas or ceramics. I see them almost as like vortices opening up the landscape or closing in on it.
Carolyn, I hate to interrupt you, but we're running a little long on the introduction.
Okay.
But maybe we can go a little bit more quickly through the other slides and then come back to some of the details when we just want to have some time to get to some of the other questions.
Okay. We can just click through.
So it was just one more.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. And so we'll, yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything more about those pictures, but we'll definitely talk more about your work when we get into some of the other conversation. So Maryrose, I think your exhibition is up next, and I'll let you do your introduction to it for our audience. Thank you, Carolyn.
Sure. Thanks, Cassandra, and thanks to Rico for inviting me, and Akma for inviting me to do this project. I'm grateful, especially because the navigating techniques that you see here at Akma is a culmination of work that started in 2017, where I did this solo show at Hudson Hills Gallery in Cincinnati. And that show is getting its kind of West Coast debut because it started there, and now I'm also adding works from the present in this body of work of navigating techniques. Rico, he saw a thread that was apparent in the works from the Red, White and Brown show, and we saw that there was a transformation of ideas that were generated from that show originally. So here on this slide, you could see some works that were done for that exhibition in Cincinnati. And we can move forward if you want. and this as well. My practice is I have a vocabulary of things that I use. The things are usually banal and ordinary. We all know that there's associations to objects, and I find that when I use the object, I can have a rich concept, because it is layered with history, it's layered with memory, it's layered with personal connections and culture. And so I like to do that. And so a lot of these things you'll see are things that I experience in my life, or I study. In this case, this stack of books, basically this drawing was made of all the books that I was reading at the time when I was in my sabbatical. Okay. So what I found out during my sabbatical, which veered into actually a kind of a unraveling of cultural identity, when it first actually started as a exploration of Shodo and Japanese calligraphy. It veered into this place of finding out more about a kind of a missing history. I use images repeatedly, like notebook paper and paper as a medium, but also as a symbol. And I found that the ruled line paper has inherent into it American. It has the red, white, and blue colors. It's something that I used when I was studying, and it's still used today. And it has connections to the educational system that was basically, maybe Rico could say, talk about it too, it's benevolent assimilation. So this concept that was basically supported by the US government to help the Filipinos to integrate well in American culture. And so I found that for years I would use these symbols, maybe unconsciously. And as I started to unravel more of the history that has been just not available when I was growing up in the 70s, and it started to bring more meaning for me. Okay. And so I use a lot of elements that we have from childhood, because I feel like my identity is really molded by my childhood here in the United States. I came when I was a toddler, and really I didn't even have a lot of language. And language is kind of a slippery place for me, because when I was a toddler in the Philippines, we weren't really taught in Tagalog, which is my parents' language, and then and they weren't even really speaking to me in English, and so I didn't inherit any language skills until I came here really to the United States. And so I have things like chalkboards, and then I like to allude to the tumultuous history that the Philippines has from colonialism and also from imperialism. Okay. And this space, I created all of these boxes as pedestals, and I really like how this kind of evolved. And I think my work does that a lot, where like it that it naturally evolves. I like making it by hand because it helps me to just think and also ruminate on ideas. A lot of the things that I read are kind of, they're not easy. And so in order to process through some of those readings and history, making things helps me to kind of almost destabilize those feelings and the oppression. And so here, I wanted to decenter this idea of the pedestal by using just boxes. And boxes as an object, I think is a real gravitation to a lot of Filipinos, because a lot of them think about the balikbayan box, which is this box that people will fill with gifts and just useful things, and also just items that that are more expensive in the Philippines, and they would ship them over to their relatives and friends, and it would be like Christmas in the Philippines. Now, because I've lived here so long, we don't do that anymore, and we did that maybe when we first immigrated here. But that association is one connection, but it has so many connections to me. I just like using paper as a material because it's accessible. I like the banality of it, and this is also referring to Andy Warhol. It's referring to consumerism. And I just wanted to do that with these boxes to make them as pedestals for the rest of the installation here. Okay, that's another one. I play around with perspective because my work evolves for me, and I was using perspective a lot because I was kind of questioning the idea of even teaching Western perspective as a drawing teacher, and it actually communicated to me that I'm also thinking about what perspective in which I have been brought up. And my understanding of it is that, well, maybe we could get into that later about point of view. Okay, you can move on. And then this installation is also part of the exhibition.
Naomi, you can move to the next one. Thank you.
Oh, actually, all right.
Oh, can you go back one? There you
go. This is an installation called Territorial Pissings. And I assembled it here at ACMA and actually tried to contextualize it. When it was originally set up at the Eagle Rock Art Center, it was inside a former library that's a Spanish colonial style building. And it was really fitted for that space. When I got an opportunity here to see the ACMA space, I knew that it had to be in kind of a contained space. And I'm so fortunate that I was able to make a wallpaper to contextualize this piece, and because of ACMA. And this has to do with a lot of the history that I unraveled, and it was using some of the imagery from a book called The Forbidden Book. It's political cartoons from the time of American imperialism. And there's just some really difficult imagery in that. And I was able to make this wallpaper that addresses kind of that phase of and time period. And then this piece is just a feature of that installation. It's called History Limited Edition, and kind of speaks for itself, I think. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Rose. I don't know, Rico, if you had anything to add or you want to chime in later about some other elements of Mary Rose's project.
Yeah, I'll chime in later.
Okay, thank you. And next, we have Kyungmi to share her exhibition with everyone.
Hello, I am Kyungmi Shin, and first of all, thank you so much to Akma and Cassandra for inviting me to create this exhibit. And I'm also really excited about this panel. That was just kind of, as I'm listening to everyone, that I guess except for Rico, everyone's women, which is really exciting, and also women of color. And I think I've been thinking about my practice, to prepare for this panel. And I was thinking about how I'm really interested in looking at the cracks in between between the official narratives. And I think as women and as a person of color, I think we get to see those cracks, right? That might be invisible to the majority voices. So I'm a sculptor, and I have been making sculptures, photo-based works, and also public artwork. And in my installation works, I've been investigating the evidence of the global connections that are evident in my personal history and experience and objects. So it's really interesting to hear about the objects that Maryrose talked about. And also I think Carolyn's work, she's working with her father, and in my work, I am kind of using my father as a point of departure or point of focus. Another, I think, background to my work, I think, is of course my experience as an immigrant, and I think a lot about the cultural hybridity, where it's, if you, as an immigrant, I think a lot of people feel that you're neither here or there, or you're both in both cultural spaces in identity. So a lot of my work is investigating that aspect as well. So, and another also history background is my experience of growing up in Korea in a Christian minister's household. And then also about 15 years ago, my partner and I have built a studio home in Ghana, which really opened my eyes up about the kind of connected world, and how when I seeing all these goods from all over the world, kind of Africa being the recycling center of the world, all the goods end up there. So really made me realize the smallness of the world and the connection. So I think the last 10 years, my kind of investigation, kind of my thinking has been a lot about kind of looking at the global connections in the current kind of evidence in the current, objects and goods that we use and look at, but also in the history. So in my exhibit at ACMA, I was looking at my father as a point of focus. And it initially came about as I was exploring the meaning of memory and identity, as my father was struggling with Alzheimer's. And in the exhibit, I am investigating my father's life to look at the larger global connections. As a Christian minister educated in South Korea at a seminary school started by American missionaries, my father's life seemed to represent many crossroads of the European, American, and Asian cultural, economic, and colonial forces. And I titled the exhibit, Father Crosses the Ocean, as a double entendre, referring to my father as well as the Catholic priests crossing the oceans. So the installation is composed of painted photos and a collection of porcelain and ceramic sculptures. And I created a large portion of the porcelain sculptures in the show in Jingdezhen, China, at an artist's residency. And Jingdezhen was the main city that exported porcelain wares to Europe for hundreds of years, creating a large influence on the European aesthetic taste, and also the European appetite for porcelain had a big economic impact on the European coffers. So both the mixed media photo works and the ceramic objects are inspired by the chinoiserie objects created in Europe, and I incorporate historical samples of chinoiserie paintings, my family photos, as well as surrealist juxtapositions inspired by the chinoiserie aesthetic in my work. So the exhibit is anchored by 3 portrait porcelain busts of my father and 3 self-portrait porcelain busts. And we could go to the next slides to look at maybe the detail of this particular shot. It's pairing the photo-based work and the bust and the tile pairing that I created in Jingdezhen, China. The next image, if you could go, shows one of the small clustering or rooms that shows various objects I created in my studio in Los Angeles, as well as a porcelain bust and a painted photo collage. And so on one side there are porcelain busts of my father, and on the other side there are 3 porcelain self-portrait porcelain busts. And in these series of busts, I explore Christian iconography and the ancient Chinese fiction Journey to the West as a counterpoint to each other, as a comment on the spiritual quest, battles with demons and the temptations illustrated as metaphors in these texts. So if you go to the next image, and then the next. I could talk about this particular image a little bit. Here in this painted photo image, I am juxtaposing 2 images. The image on the background is a group portrait of young ministers from South Korea. My father is on the top right. And on top is illumination from a medieval manuscript that seemed to really illustrate the kind of world powers, or the plotting of the conquering of the world. On top, you could see the kings and bishops plotting, and on the right you see the soldiers, at war with a dead soldier at the bottom right, and on the left side you see a priest on a boat, on a ship, and 2 merchants standing next to it. So this image, I was very struck by how it was this kind of the priest about to go to the new world is represented in a manuscript. So I used this image a lot, and I thought a lot about how it seemed like the group photo in the background is almost on the other end of this narrative illustrated in the medieval manuscript. And I kind of am thinking about how this image represents this kind of the adopting of Western philosophy or religion in the colonies. And I am right now reading a book called The Bible and the Global South. And right now, I think in the world, the majority of the Christians are actually in the Global South, or formerly called the Third World. So it's interesting how this reversal of these kind of ideologies, and how this movement of these religious ideology have come from one place and now centered around a different kind of have a different axis. So anyway, these are some of the images. Maybe we could just go through the rest of the slides, and I'll just make quick comments. And this is the other side with self-portrait, and another photo collage with image of a chinoiserie image of Jean-Francois Boucher. We could go to the next here. Background image is a painting by Jean-Francois Boucher, and in the foreground is a portrait, a group portrait at a picnic with my father. And the next one, it's another room where I have a self-portrait bust, and on the table I have a celadon objects, including self-portrait and opium puppies done in celadon porcelain as well. The next image, detail of that image, and in the background you could see another painted photo image, painted photo artwork in the background. So that's it for my presentation.
Thank you so much. these are, you know, it's wonderful for me to actually get to hear you all talk about these works relative to each other, because, and for other people to get to learn about them. I feel like I've known about all these wonderful connections that I see between all the work, including yours, actually, Marcia. And I think it's, you know, after so many months, and, you know, because we haven't had the opportunity to have an opening reception, to me, this conversation really feels meaningful, because I hope that we can sort of now that you've all gotten a chance to learn about these artist projects, we can tease out some of these really rich relationships between them all. And one of those relationships that I think is really central is this idea of cultural identity, but also relative to the experience of immigration. So I wanted to ask if you could each touch on that a little bit, and how you consider your framing of ideas about identity relative to your own experience or your family's own immigration experience. And some of you have touched on that a little bit already, but maybe there's a specific piece or a specific image that you want to go back to talk about in a little bit more depth relative to that. So we can go in any order. I don't know if anyone feels just like they have something right off the top of their head that they want to say in answer to that question. And hopefully this can be kind of an organic conversation at this point forward too. You don't want to be brave and get started and get started. Oh, you're muted. You need to unmute. Carolyn, if you
okay. Hi. I can. I guess, I mean, with the photographs, because my father was such a, you know, I mean, kind of like a hoarder in a way, or he kept everything that he took photographs of, or other people's that he kept copies of. I feel like it's almost like a perfect timeline portrait of this family, right? Of my family from the 50s to 2011 or 2013, and thinking about them as, I mean, they're immigrants. I mean, I think the immigration conversation in the US has been part of our creation story and called different things, but I think the photographs as a kind of portrait, and in a way, like maybe like it normalizes them in a certain way. Like there's, you know, my cousin's high school invitation from Glendora High School, and he played football, and so I guess that's my maybe take on it in a certain way.
One of the things that is really interesting is this notion of sort of like personally identifying a specific element of your life, and I think each of you come at that from such a different way, and there is something so distinct and personal and vulnerable, I think, about these shows too, in that way, that you're really sort of giving over a certain aspect of your past and your own histories in each of these projects in a really beautiful way. Marcia, I saw you wanting to speak up a little bit. You need to unmute your mic though. Or Melanie, maybe you can help her do that. There you go.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm not really an immigrant, and yet I am an immigrant. My parents were missionaries in Chile, and I was born and raised there. And I came up to the States when I was 15. So it's kind of a different experience, and yet my whole background is from Chile. And it was a very rich background, and we were living mostly with working class people and very poor people. It was a very rich experience. When I came to this country, I found it very difficult. I found it very extroverted, and people seem to be so educated and so self-assured. And I think, and I'd like to show those two images of my two early videos now, if possible. Nalini? Because in the late 80s, I did some videos that were, this one is one of them. I think I called this the Gray Room. And it was a somewhat performative, but it is a short video. And I think it was pretty powerful. And this is the other one. And sort of symbolically commenting on the change of cultures. So thank you, Nalini. So, okay, thank you.
Not to call you out, but Rika, I saw you taking some notes. You look like you have something to say, maybe.
No, it was just really interesting how everyone's work is sort of related to each other in a very specific way. The title for Maryrose's show, Navigating Techniques, sort of stems out of the idea, a philosophical idea of techniques that is related to, is rooted in the mythological idea of Prometheus and Epimetheus, and how Epimetheus forgot, because Epimetheus is afterthought and Prometheus is forethought. Epimetheus didn't count for humans when he was giving out qualities and traits. So Prometheus had to give humans something, and that is art, fire, and the notion of the present, which we call memory. And so this idea of techniques then developed through Western philosophy and art and history and memory are all tied in together. And this idea actually works in everyone's work. And so I was just making notes because I was, making a mental map of how this idea is going through each person's work. So that's what I was doing.
Wow.
Thank you. Yes, Kyungmi.
I think just wanted to make a quick note about the immigrant experience. And I came to the US as a very young adult at age 19. And I think I think even in living in Korea, I felt like I lived two different worlds, which is the society at large, which is Confucius-based philosophy with a very largely Buddhist population, but I was the minority, the Christian minority. So I felt like I had to navigate the two kind of different cultural spaces. But then when I came to the United States, it's another layer of different cultural spaces. And I think the gift of that, having that immigrant experience, is that you understand the relativity of ideas and ideologies, and that you understand that it is all in the perspective. So I think that had been a gift of being an immigrant, that you understand those relative relationships of different positions. So I think that's what's led me to be interested in the hybridity. And the more you study, you realize there's no cultures stand alone. It's always interconnected and inter-influenced. What an object or musical instrument that you think is uniquely your cultural object might have origin somewhere far away from your culture. So I think that has been such an interesting and rich investigation as I do more research about the cultures and connectivity. And I think that's one of the biggest inspirations for my work.
Thank you. Super interesting. Just to hear the relationships between them. Maryrose, you look like you had something to add.
I think it's really interesting because like Carolyn, you had images of MacArthur Park. And when I looked at those images, we first immigrated in Catalina Street on Wilshire near MacArthur Park. And it was kind of like, I was like, these photos look like our photos when we were growing up. So I love that I saw a familiarity to it. And see investigations also in Carolyn's work about like the object and the memory of those objects and how they associate with her and her culture. And I think that that's like really resonates for me because, you know, the identity of Filipinos, I think, is pretty complex. I'm thinking that Rico would agree. And it's because of these like missing pieces that we all grew up with. There's basically, you know, there's parts of us that if you immigrate here when you're really young, your parents don't pass down any of that information about, at least mine didn't, about the Philippines, because they've already been taught about America and how to be American. And that was laid down really long time ago. And also the colonialism of the Spanish erased a lot of our indigenous history. So there's this, like, I find that as I keep maturing and growing, I'm finding all of these things being revealed to me. And as a college student, I would read something, but it wasn't clear at all. It didn't resonate because I was still, I was just so far away from understanding that language. I didn't feel like I was here or belonged here. And so reading American history without any Filipino history made that even more apparent. And then I think until you start, at least for myself, learning that I have to kind of like I need to decolonize and not actually be doing exactly what I was trained and unlearn all of that, will I actually understand what really is the experience of the Filipino American and Filipinos. Yeah. Anyway, Rico, you want to add?
Well, I think your sense of unlearning is really interesting in your work, and this sort of pushing back against these sort of dominant or, you know, historically dominant narratives. And I think Kyungmi touching on that as far as you all being women artists as well connects to that in an interesting way. And that is, I mean, Rico, obviously you're welcome to comment more, but the next question I wanted to ask was about this idea of storytelling or even language and writing, and how that has influenced your work, and what ways some of these ideas we've been talking about sort of get sort of fleshed out or, you know, played out for you through ideas around language. Anyone want to tackle that one?
I can talk just briefly about the kind of reference that I use in my work.
Sure.
In the self-portrait busts and the porcelain tiles, I use image from the journey to, or I use as an inspiration, the Chinese fiction Journey to the West, which is based on a historical character. So I think I found this very interesting. It's one of the most well-known narrative throughout Asia, not just in China, but in any, I think, countries that have heavy Buddhist influence, familiar with this narrative. It's so about this historical figure from the 600s, Xuan Zhang, a monk who went to India and studied Buddhism and brought back a Buddhist text back to China. But this fiction was written about 900 years later. And what was really interesting about this fiction is that it is a fantastical kind of reimagination of a historical narrative. And I think, you know, in this case, there is mythological figures, there are monsters, demons, you know, characters with superpowers. So it is almost like, you know, it's a great material for, you know, mangas and movies, and it has been made into that. But I feel like a lot of historical narratives are actually fictional narratives in many cases to try to tell a story from the perspective of the winners. So I think, you know, even though it is a very much fictionalized narrative, it is a really interesting metaphor about life, about spiritual quest, and things like that. So that's my little sense about using narrative in my work specifically.
I guess just to clarify, I think I mean storytelling in a whole range, and language in a whole range of ways, whether it's a family narrative or a historic. I mean, books play a really important part of your practice, Maryrose, and I know poetry for you, Marcia, is also an important influence. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about. Whoever wants to speak up, Carolyn.
Yeah, sure. Yes, I mean, I think as the pictures and accumulation as a kind of, as being very narrative or telling the story of this family, and that you could, you know, the viewer could discern or the situations, what's happening with them, and all throughout the different photographs. In the show, which was the last image that we saw, there's a
let's go back to that.
kind of
Melanie,
a wall of photographs of my, yeah.
Yeah, let's go back and touch on that, because I know I cut you off before. Melanie, thank you. Go, there you go. Nope, a little bit, couple forward. There. Carolyn? Are you with us?
Looks like her screen is dark.
We might.
But she is there.
Maybe we can come back to these. Did anyone else want to? Yeah, she might have to rejoin the conversation, but did anyone else have a comment to make, and we can come back to Carolyn? Marcia or Rika?
Oh, yeah. I can talk something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you're talking about language, and in the choral piece, I had the songs that were composed by Anna were based on the phrases of Pablo Neruda. And speaking of languages, right? Es ojos profundos, or profound eyes. De la noche, las grandes raíces crecen desde tu alma. Of the night, great roots grow from your soul. Horas perseguidas, pursued hours. Sed eterna, eternal thirst. And those are the words that are sung and repeated in that choral piece that I have, and certainly based on language. And my work tends to be based on psychological perspectives, and so certainly these words convey that.
And can you talk a little bit about the way that the poem and the relationship between music as a, you sort of used the poem as a score, right? To compose the video.
Right, yeah. As I said, the influences with minimalist art and minimalist music.
Hello.
Particularly Steve, right?
Okay.
And so what I did was take parts of the songs, and I made my little marks with the image of the women singing. It's a choir of 14 women, all volunteers, and they were wonderful singers, and all choral singers. And so I made these little marks of with their faces as they sang, and repeated them in multiple ways, so that there's an overlayering of sound and image throughout that work. It's about 13 minutes long, I think. I hope people will listen to the whole thing and look at it, because it's a pretty powerful piece. So it's interesting. Several people have told me that they thought that piece was about death, which totally surprised me, but I can kind of see it. And when there are two people who I highly admire, of course, Mark Rothko, and in his recipe for a very good painting, he said that the first ingredient, quote unquote, ingredient of a good painting was awareness of death. And Tarkovsky, Andrei Tarkovsky, the great, wonderful, wonderful filmmaker who was functioning in the 50s and 60s, I highly recommend his films. He also says the same thing, that to create powerful artwork, an awareness of death is very, very important. So anyway, I wanted to share that.
Marcia. Do we want to go back to the image, Carolyn, that you were going to talk about? Finally, we'll talk about this image.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so in the back wall there's a selection of photographs taken by my father of my mother, standing in different locations around Los Angeles. This series is called Parece ahí, mija, or Stand There, Darling. And in them, she's standing at different kind of tourist locations, like Groman's or Mann's Chinese Theater, the Biltmore, in front of the Biltmore Hotel, Santa Monica Pier, maybe MacArthur Park or Lafayette Park, Marilyn Monroe's grave site, I believe is that one. I'm not sure what the top left one is, but it's another kind of amusement park. And then the top two are at the Rose Parade. And in one, it says, "Welcome to Pasadena," and she's with my brother. And then the second one to the right is she's standing there looking a little bit miffed, and there's a policeman with his arm on her shoulder. And I found that photograph like really interesting in that it's just an maybe what many of us have experienced at a public event when the policemen come and they're like, okay, time to get a move on, and he's just ushering her on. Or there's a very like fine line of maybe like a moment of potential like violence or what's going to happen to her, and her face maybe tells the story of being uncomfortable with the situation. So I think, in the photographs, there's a lot of moments like that of kind of revealing what the story is, or other kind of moments of being, there's a whole section that's not written in this show of my parents at the family at Knott's Berry Farm or Disneyland, kind of almost like every year. I guess back when we could afford to go, but I think of these places of being, they're so American, but for, the immigrant community, they're part of so many families' memories. In the collage wall also, on the drawings that use the gold motifs, in my research, I found kind of a map that shows the trade routes from Peru in the Incan Empire, going all the way up to southern Mexico. And so thinking about this exchange of goods and this kind of migration, right, of people traveling back and forth is actually happening for, you know, hundreds or thousands of years. And so I wanted to make that connection in the work as well. That's all. Oh, now you're muted.
Sorry, I was just talking about this thread of using language and text. And I don't know if Maryrose or Rico, you want to comment about the way that plays out in your exhibition a little bit. And then we might just, I don't know, we don't have too many questions, but if anyone has a question, you want to type it into the Q&A while we're listening, we can take your questions. I have one more too, but we'll see if we get any from the audience.
I'll just say a quick thing about how language functions for me. I believe that I use it more kind of like a supportive aspect to my work. I'm almost like just appropriating the words that suit the object. So I think that the object has the narrative for me, and I just use the words to give information about the object.
Interesting.
But I think though that, you know, within Maryrose's work, it's like the narrative structure is always present, and as well as with everyone's work on this panel, is that, you know, like the way to tell stories is based on history. History, you know, is the grand narrative. And I think that, you know, like maybe as an artist, you're focusing on the specific histories that you're working with, whether it's the mark making in Marcia's videos, or the photographs in Carolyn's work, or the history books and Maryrose's drawings, or the chinoiserie, or the pages in Kyungmi's work. But these are all based on histories. And history is sort of like the big grand narrative that, you know, that is being told, whether it is considered truthful or the real narrative or whatever. But I think it's there, that thread is constant within the shows.
Yeah, one of the phrases I think I used in my early thinkings about this season was about this idea of rewriting of history and sort of retelling of these stories, and maybe reclaiming those histories on your own terms. I do see a question, but I am going to ask one last question that I have, and if you feel like answering it, please do so, but you don't necessarily have to, because it has been interesting to me that the moment in which we initially framed these exhibitions, you know, 9 months ago, 6 months ago, whenever, I feel like the world has shifted so much. This is the inevitable question, right? But I do think that now we see all of this work through a different lens. And I just wanted to ask how your own thinking on this work has evolved over the course of the past now 7 months, I guess, both in the context of the global pandemic, but also with the heightened focus on recognizing racial injustices, and the way that has really shifted so many things, so many of these histories and structures that we're all, I think, coming to terms with and wanting to resist or reconsider in new ways. So I know it's a lofty question, but I would love to hear what you think about that. Anyone want to take it on? Want to jump in, Kyungmi?
Yeah, just briefly, I think we had really taken for granted this connectedness of the world, and I think this pandemic had traveled so much faster than the previous ones because we travel so much more and the goods move about in so much, you know, in a faster way. But historically, I think it has always been going on, and the diseases have been brought, you know, to the U.S. from the Europe, and that's part of the big reason why the native population had been wiped out, and these different diseases for the plants and animals also were imported from Europe, and vice versa. I think that kind of the traveling it, you know, the globalization really includes not only the goods, but also the diseases. So I think it's really, this pandemic had really heightened that relationship that we normally don't even think about. So that had been a kind of different, interesting observation for me. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to say about
I'll see some.
how things have shifted? Yes, Marcia.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I did a couple pieces that were quite good in the early 2000s. I interviewed 5 women concerning their immigration experience from various countries. One was from Hong Kong, one was from Amsterdam, another one from Venezuela, and another one from I think China, and Peru also, and that turned out to be a very good and powerful video work. And so I'm thinking, because this issue is so prevalent today, I would like to do another version of that with younger artists exploring their experience in immigration and how they've been treated in this country, and also exploring the shift in art from my generation to these younger artists who are coming from, it seems to be almost a very different place. So I have that in mind, and I think I could probably pursue that fairly soon. Okay.
Interesting. So this time work has caused you to sort of rethink or go back to revisit another project.
Yeah.
Yeah, an earlier project. Maryrose, you look like you were about to say something.
Well, for me, when I did that territorial pissings piece, originally it was kind of a personal work that stemmed from my own experience as involved in the institutions that I'm surrounded by. You know, from like what is that called? It's called microaggressive kind of, you know, issues. And when I was asked to do that show, it was to deal with place and how Filipino Americans, or how you as a Filipino American feels about your existence in place and space. And because that show was all Filipino Americans and it was curated by a Filipino American, I felt some safety to deal with that issue. And what I think is happening now that it's in this exhibition, and finding out a lot and uncovering about the racism that Filipinos Americans experienced here in America, creating that wallpaper it actually doesn't make me surprised by what's happening right now with this administration. So, you know, there's like a systemic kind of like a thought, a way of thinking about people. And some of those images from that book were objectifying Filipinos, and you know, so it made me aware of the movements of that are justified in Black Lives Matter and others that's happening right now. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
I guess for me, I mean, on one hand, the pandemic, right, and just thinking about, like Kyungmi said, that these diseases, right, have different diseases, and these diseases have crossed borders and around the world and affected communities for, you know, a long, long time. And we're living in this, one of those moments where it's come back again in a major way. I guess, I mean, we had the swine flu and other ones, but this is like a major worldwide event. And I think that I didn't think that it would go on this long. And now I feel like, oh no, might go on a few more years. And really seeing this moment in the context of history of these other, you know, when like the Spanish flu and like the colonial diseases that were brought over. And then the kind of, as it's being called, the new civil rights movement, right? And thinking about violence and police brutality, and thinking about I mean, I think immigrant communities have experienced that intersection with the law, are very familiar with that. So I think when people started responding and protesting the George Floyd murder, right, a lot of kids and people of color were coming out in support of that. And I think it's just been interesting where there's been maybe like in the Latino community, a riff or tension with the African-American community. This moment has kind of brought the communities closer together, at least with, I think, the Latino community in support of the African-American community, or at least I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I think really what I hear from everyone together is this, not only a reflection on the ways in which the world has and always will be really interconnected, and the long view of the history of that interconnection, right? I mean, the sense of, for me, I think there's really interesting sense of perspective that I think each of your exhibitions really bring. This kind of both a very intimate and personal perspective on your own histories and your own stories, but also the broader implications, both around the world, but also across time. And I think there's something really poignant and meaningful to me that we're able to show these exhibitions at this particular moment relative to that. And we do have one question from the audience. And I think this probably is for Kyungmi and Carolyn. And Hadley is asking, can you talk about the symbolism / use of the father figures?
Okay. Okay. Father figure.
Interesting relative to the conversation we've been having. Even.
Well, I don't know. Can we?
Or the father figure, or literally the father.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's actually a bit loaded question as well, right? And I think in my work, I think in a way, my relationship with my father was very, close, but also at some point very contentious because of the religious differences. And I think the father figure, as well as literally the father, or is it the Catholic father? There's, for me, it's a question encompasses all those figures. I think, reflecting on your father, I think is a very metaphorical kind of gesture in a way also, because it is about kind of looking at your heritage as well, my own heritage, I think, right? Because my identity was formed by, with my first, in my early stages of my life, with interactions with my parents. So I think, like it or not, I think, your parents' identity is so intertwined with your own identity as well. So I think in exploring my father's life, I think having a distance in the sense that my father having an Alzheimer, I think it gave me a personal, in a way, a bit of a space for me to reflect and ponder upon his life. And I think it's a way for me to digest my relationship to my father, and I think an opportunity to look at his life a little bit more objectively from a larger kind of societal, cultural, and historical context instead of just the personal relationship that I had with my father. So I guess that's kind of a multi-layered answer to the question. I don't know if it answers your question well or not, but that's my little, yeah.
It's interesting that even though both you and Carolyn are making work that comes from a certain relationship to your own fathers, maybe this idea of a traditional father figure may not play out for you in your work in the same way that we might typically use that phrase. I don't know, maybe. So maybe that's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or it's not necessarily your reasoning, the reasoning behind your choice of working with it, like your father's photo archive, for example.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like, I mean, my father was I mean, he was like a complicated person, like in many ways, a labor, kind of working with his hands kind of guy. He had this print shop. He worked as an electrical, he made electrical grids, or I forget what it's called, but you know, like in a factory, right, for many years. But he had this background from Colombia of kind of graphic, you know, like printing and silkscreen. And at some point in the 80s, opened up his little shop and kind of that was his business. And he also was an avid kind of amateur family photographer throughout his whole life. And then in his shop kind of made it more, you know, he put himself out, you know, was up for hire by people in the community. And so in many ways, as I got older, he became my greatest kind of supporter, and we collaborated on many projects and exchange of ideas. And so we're kind of becoming an artist sometimes in certain, you know, families or an immigrant family, you're like, I'm going to become an artist. They're like, what? We've done all of this and now you're going to do what crazy thing? And both my parents, but he was very supportive. And at one point I realized like, oh, you're an artist too. Like he was always inventing something in the backyard and coming, you know, come, you know, see what I made. And one day it was like the bubble chairs. And so I think the pandemic really has hampered my hopes for, I mean, we as artists were like, oh, make art for the public. But in many ways, this show was for my family. So I'm like, come on, pandemic, because they're all ancient now and they're like afraid to go outside. So hopefully they can come.
Well, it's very safe to visit ACMA. We have taken many precautions, I should say. Everyone is required to wear a mask, and we're limiting the number of visitors who can come in at any time, but we have been really careful. And we really do want to welcome the public back and to see these amazing exhibitions in person. So thank you to all of you participants and audience members for joining us. I do hope that you come and see the exhibitions. Thank you so much to our fabulous panelists. I'm so grateful to all of you for our time. We've almost been talking for 2 hours, so I think we could probably go on for longer, but these are such wonderful, rich exhibitions. And I hope, you know, again, we'll have more conversations and more opportunities to connect with one another, hopefully in person eventually. But thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.